Welcome back to the show. Well, we've had a bit of a gap over January, mainly because we've been really busy at Exige, and we've also been working hard on developing the new concept for the podcast. So we've got some really exciting changes coming in 2021. As you'll notice, though, from all of the shows going forward, we're trying to keep it to 1 hour to respect your time and hopefully really pack in lots of wisdom in a manageable and consumable length of show. And I'll be telling you a bit more about the new concept for the show over the coming episodes. And I'll be seeking your feedback for those episodes so you can tell us whether or not you're enjoying them. And that will help us know if we're going in the right direction together or if we should do something different. My first guest for this 2021 episode is Andy Rear, former CEO of Munich Re Digital Partners. Many will know Andy because he's been an absolute cornerstone in the development and growth of the insurtech space because of the work that Munich Re Digital Partners does in supporting many of the new and innovative insurers who have entered the market over the last 4 years. For those of you who don't know, Munich Re are the world's second largest reinsurer, and Digital Partners is that division in which they've used to incubate some very exciting insurtechs through supporting them with their platform and investment. And Andy will talk a little bit about that. But the main point of this podcast was to really tap into Andy's experience and understanding of what it takes to grow a business. And so I'm calling this episode The Skills You Don't Have. Because as you grow a business, it becomes increasingly important to recognize that you need talented people around you who can fill the gaps that you just can't see to. Andy specifically shares what he's learned about how to find and support those talented people who will help his organization grow, and how specifically important trust is within a business and how to create it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And without further ado, I give you Andy Rear. So Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure to get you on the show, and I wanted you here because I think you've had a very interesting career so far. We've known each other for a number of years, but you started out with University of Cambridge in mathematics, and then did a short stint at Pru. But I got to know you mostly when you were working at Oliver Wyman, where you found your way into insurance practice there. And you left Oliver Wyman as the head of the Amir insurance consulting practice. And then you made a leap to industry as a CEO, which many in consulting would love to do. So I would sort of like you maybe just to sort of tell us a bit about, your own journey from consulting into industry with Munich Re, and maybe what you found particularly challenging or different about becoming a CEO after leaving consulting.
Sure. Yeah. I started out in industry, and I went through, sort of mid-management kind of positions. The thing I always felt then was that in industry, you don't have the sort of intellectual bite that you have in consulting. In consulting, you're just presented with a series of hard problems all the time. In industry, you don't really get intellectually difficult problems. What you get is stress. You get, you have to absorb stuff. And at the time, I was sort of frustrated. You go through school and university, and most of that is really about intellectually challenging things. You do a math degree at Cambridge. It's extremely intellectually challenging, frankly, too intellectually challenging for me. So so I ended up in consulting, and I loved it. I loved solving problems. I loved going into a business, working really, really hard to get my head around what was going on and to come up with a solution. And that's what, as a brand, Oliver Wyman was very sort of solutions oriented. It wasn't about getting things done. It was about finding the key that would unlock something. Towards the end of my time at Oliver Wyman, I was there for 10 years, and we built the insurance practice from scratch, which was an amazing adventure. Oliver Wyman was a banking business when we joined it, and myself and 3 colleagues basically built the insurance practice from scratch, 2 from outside the business and 2 from inside the business. But I found myself working for Aegon, the big Dutch insurer. and they were going through a transformation. They'd had a really tough time in the global financial crisis, and they were going through a sort of existential restructure about thinking about how the subsidiaries work compared to the group, and the group was trying to get more control. And it was, we came on board because it was an interesting intellectual problem. First of all, how do you organize the group? How do you move a group from one that's very decentralized to having a little bit more structure, but without losing that sort of decentralized culture? But I got to know Alex Winans, the Aegon CEO, very well. And what I realized was that when we left after 4 or 5 months of work, we left him with what I then realized was the most interesting problem of all. We'd written this out on slides, and it was all very, very clear, but he had to get his management to buy into this. And so he had to get management to buy into a group headquarters that was going to be much more interventionist, that was going to have many more lines into the center. So there would be there's a group HR structure and a group strategy structure, rather than everything going from group CEO to business unit CEO. And there was that's a huge change management effort. And the more I thought about that, and the more I talked to Alex, in the sort of months and then years after that project, the more I thought, actually, it's that's really interesting, isn't it? It's the really interesting problems in life are when you are trying to get people who are who are very, very good at what they do, and you're trying to bring them around to your way of thinking, and you're trying to bring them with you on a journey rather than sort of write down the answer on a slide. And so as soon as I had that realization, I realized that the next stage of my career had to be back doing that, had to be back being a change leader rather than an ideas guy. I took so I made the decision to leave Oliver Wyman. I started looking around. I found myself working for the Financial Stability Board, who were trying to figure out there's a whole question about systemic risk and how how to prevent the banks all failing again, and they brought I got involved because they wanted to understand the extent to which insurance had the same risk, whether it had the same risks or not, and in a sense that sort of disconnected me a bit from the run of the mill consulting, going to visit clients, doing an ongoing piece of work because I was doing this piece of research, and then I took 3 months off, and then honestly I struck lucky. Almost every headhunter, in fact, every headhunter but one I talked to said, look, the only way to go from consultant to industry is to go through a head of group strategy position, wait your time out. And I've never been very good at waiting. I'm a bit impatient. As luck would have it, I met Jenny from Heidrick and Struggles, who said, yes, that's the advice I would normally give you, but as it happens, I have the perfect role for you. And the rest is history.
Yeah, that's I think often we do fall into the trap, don't we, of treading the same path that others do, because we see it as a rule, we see it as the only way to go. And maybe that's a nice link in some ways to the idea of innovation in insurance. But, I'd like to, just before we get there, I'd like to just talk a little bit about ideas versus execution, because you said something earlier on really about this sort of difference between consulting and then going to industry. So now that you've been as a CEO of a unit, how much of your experience has been, or time is spent on ideas versus execution now in these sort of CEO positions?
I'm not sure that's the right. I'm not sure that's the right split, actually. It's maybe ideas versus execution versus persuasion. I think most of my life is persuasion. I think that's most of what a CEO does. So one of the things I used to think about when I found myself in Munich Re, I was a year and a bit into my career in Munich Re. They gave me a bigger mandate, so I had. I ran the life business in UK, Africa, Asia Pacific. So that was, I forget, about 15 businesses, not 15 offices, all in a structure. So I, of course, had a set of direct reports. Those direct reports had direct reports who had direct reports who had direct reports. And when I looked at the businesses where we had problems or strategic opportunities, and we were trying to do something, you then realize the limits of your own power, because really all you can do as someone in charge of somebody else is instruct that person you're in charge of. You can't really reach much further. You might be able to reach to the next level down, but you can't reach further than that. They say the ideal size of a business or the ideal maximum size of a business is 100 to 150 people, because more than that you can't know those people. And if you don't know them, they're not your people. And if they're not your people, they're not going to do what you want them to do. So as CEO of a sort of confederation of businesses like that, you can make big decisions. I can decide, oh, let's close our Japanese business. Absolutely, I can do that. But I can't get the Japanese business to think about data differently, because it's not the CEO of the Japanese business that does that, nor is it the person he reports to. It's someone 2-3 layers down, and I don't know that guy's name, and he doesn't know my name. Well, he knows my name and knows my face, but he's never spoken. Real power in an organization, I think, exists primarily at the sort of team leader level. And depending on the size of the structure, and that can be at different points. But basically, the person, at the bottom of an organization, you have somebody who does something. They spend all doing things. And then above them, you have the person that controls the people who are doing things. Now, those people have power because they are very close to the levers. They can turn to you and go, "Will, stop doing that over there and do this." I can't, right? If I'm your boss's boss, the best I can do is say, "Look, could you get Will to do something different?" And that guy will go, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." Or give me 15 reasons why actually Will can't do that and he's got to do this. So what you have to do as a CEO of anything but a small business is you spend your time creating the picture that you want, drawing the picture, and getting your staff to follow you on that picture. It doesn't matter whether it's a strategy that came out of your head, or from some consultants, or from the team, or from your boss, or where it comes from. What matters is, can you bring the people with you on the journey, and then can you protect those people?
So this sort of idea then of persuasion, of like leading people to sort of follow you, showing them the picture, as you put it. What were the tools that you found to be most effective in painting that picture and creating a persuasive environment for them to follow?
The first word that springs to mind actually is truth. I think in business we don't tell the truth enough, and in both my most difficult situations at Munich Re, I found truth really mattered. So we had one business which was just strategically a mess. It was designed for a market which no longer existed, and it had a huge cost base for a market which was almost zero profit margin, and it was designed to do things that the market didn't really value anymore. So obviously we cut very hard in that business. And one of the things that happens when you cut cost in a business, in particular when you cut people, I mean, no one cares if you cut overhead, but as soon as you start making redundancies, you create some sort of fear in the business, even when very often, this was my first experience of making redundancies, and what you actually see is that people do get it. They see the people who are being asked to leave, and they go, this person doesn't work as hard as me, let's say. So they do accept it, but you always have that sense that you've then told them that your business is in difficulty, and you have to be very careful not to just tell them that it's all fixed, because if you tell them it's all fixed, then the next time you go and do something, they're like, oh well, it's broken again, or maybe he didn't tell us the truth the first time. And so what we did, and it took me a couple of attempts to realize that I had to do this, was we had to explain to the staff what the economics of the business were, and we had to put it in terms that they could all understand, so that they could see, they could understand what our cost base needed to be, where our cost base was today, what we thought the market was doing. And then you come back 6 months later or 3 months later, and you say, this is what we thought was going on, this is how we are against that track, and this is why for now we don't have a cost problem. And we let people then work it out for themselves, and they could see. And a couple of years later, when we did have to take a bit more cost out of the business, it was a surprisingly smooth process, because people understood, they saw the chart, they recognized the chart, and they realized that that's what we had to do.
That's really interesting. I hear in that then that there's this idea of truth as a key pillar for creating a much more accurate perception of the situation, and that gives people who are doing the work, who are executing, who are out in the field, agency to make the right decisions. So you give them the truth, help them see the situation clearly, and am I hearing you right? Then that helps them then make the right decisions to go and do the right thing. And have you found that people will do the right thing most of the time once they're given that responsibility?
Yes, that's right. Yes, agency is a really good thing. Yes, businesses often don't give their people agencies. One of the things I found, and I still find this all over the place, is the sort of multiple sign-off thing. So one of the first things I did when I joined Munich Re, it's very odd. Your first day as a CEO, you really have imposter syndrome. You're sitting in the office and you've got this massive desk. Oliver Wyman, you never even had your own office. Didn't matter if you were the managing partner, you still didn't have your own office. So I've got this big office and a desk and a secretary whose job appeared to be to keep people away from talking to me. But so in comes somebody with an appointment for me to sign a treaty. So this is ostensibly a legal document, and it's a legal document that involves the transfer of hundreds of millions of pounds for risk. So I ought to really take this seriously. And I see 11 people have signed this before me.
Wow.
So I start asking about this, and what I realize is it's really complicated. The treaty is actually a CD of the premium rates. So I'm signing off this CD without actually having.
Do you want to explain those things? So you've got a treaty, a CD, not something you listen to in your car, not like an old-fashioned CD.
Yes, no. CD is something you listen to in your car, right? So treaty. So treaty is in reinsurance. You are selling insurance to insurers. So you're covering the bigger risks that an insurer might not want to cover themselves. So it's earthquakes, it's pandemics. There's a current example. You cover the pandemic so that your client, who's the insurer that your listeners might have heard of, Aviva or Legal & General, doesn't go bankrupt because of a pandemic. You use like Munich Re, who has a huge global balance sheet, and they can survive. I think it's public. I can't remember the exact number, but Munich Re's hit on the pandemic is of the order of €1 billion, something like that, and that's the kind of money that Munich Re can sort of shrug its shoulders and go, okay, that's fine. So the treaty is the contract that covers that relationship. So what you have is, we say, depending on what business you sell, Legal & General, we will charge you this much money for that kind of risk. And the treaty comes in a form. It's probably 30 or 40 pages long, and it's all legalese. It's all just legal contract wording, and it refers to the rates. And And because the rates are complicated, because Legal & General sells many, many different types of business, rather than put all the rates on into the treaty, typing them up, you put them on a CD, physically the kind of thing.
Literally a CD. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, these days they probably go on Google Drive or something. But this is, so I'm signing this treaty, which I've not read. I started reading it, but I realized I didn't really understand it. You really have imposter syndrome then. Like this is one of the deals that our business does, and I don't really understand it, and I'm signing the thing. And the answer I was given was, you don't need to worry because everybody else has seen it before you. And I thought, well, why should I sign it then? So, I mean, of course I signed it. But it struck me that, if you have 12 people, if 12 people have to sign something, then the first person that signs it doesn't really care because 11 people check it after him. Second person, the same. There's still 10 people to go. By the time you get to the middle, well, 5 people have looked at this already, so I can just sign it now. So I'm thinking, who takes responsibility for this? Who is the person who has actually read this thing end to end and gone, yes, it's been done correctly, there's nothing wrong? And so I sat down in an executive meeting one day and said, guys, how about we only have 2 signatories? We have the person that writes it and the person that checks it, and they take responsibility. And because if you're one of 2 people that sign something, then absolutely you take responsibility and you read it. And the reason they haven't done that was not because these people were not capable of doing it, not for any legal reason, but just because they didn't want relatively junior people in the organization being responsible for signing something. If you sign something, you've got to be the CEO. That seems to be absurd, right? The person that takes responsibility for something should be the person who's close enough to understand what it is. And you give them responsibility, and it works.
Yeah, okay, that was exactly it. And I was going to say to you then, so in giving people responsibility in that instance, did you find that was those people who had to sign, those 2 people, were they happy with that responsibility, with that new level of agency?
Yes, and actually questions started to come back from them. So this would be the first time that they would question, what about this clause? Are we happy with this clause? Does this make sense? Are we comfortable? And all of a sudden you realize there's this huge amount of knowledge. What we found was that that the people who are now the sort of final signature on a document, they really took that role seriously. They really did make sure that we were that they knew what they were signing and that what they were signing was correct. And that's massive, right? It's massive, not just because it avoids you making mistakes. It's massive because it gives those guys, a real sense of purpose, a real sense of what their role is, what they're contributing to the business, and how important that is.
Well, this is an important link here then, because you mentioned something about imposter syndrome, and I suppose everybody up and down the chain in an organization is feeling that way as you move up through the levels of any organization. So when you were dealing with this idea of imposter syndrome as a CEO, was there a point at which you felt like that sort of idea of imposter syndrome, or is that something that just sort of persists?
Yeah, for me, the point when you become comfortable with your work is when you need to move on. I sort of characterize it in there are sort of 2 distinct phases. There is that, and for me, it was really the first time you're suddenly the CEO of something. Then you really have, if you like, acute imposter syndrome, where you're, how on earth did somebody give me this responsibility? And of course, how you get that responsibility. You get that responsibility because you're good at bullshitting in an interview, really.
Yes.
I never had the sense that I deserved that in that way. Maybe I'm not arrogant enough, but. So that's quite acute, and that goes away. You get comfortable with the role. You realise that your direct reports, some of whom are, or in my case, all of whom are more experienced than me, you realise that they are comfortable with that they see you as a good CEO, and then that sort of goes away. You still, I think, always have that, the sort of chronic imposter syndrome, where you still feel you ought to know what's going on more than you do. And I think when you get to the point that you think you know what's going on so well that you no longer have that sort of nagging feeling, then you should probably move on. I think at that point you've probably run out of ideas.
To you then, in terms of a learner's mindset, is that something, that humility of being ready to learn and to admit that you don't have the answer, is that part of the solution, or is that part of the journey, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that is a part of growth. It's a bit sort of admitting to yourself. I like that idea. You sort of admit to yourself that you have a career. So you admit to yourself that you've made it to wherever it is that you are, and it's okay for that person in that position not to know everything.
Yeah.
And one of the jobs I had to do when I was running Asia, the Asians in some countries like Japan and Korea is a good example. They like the sort of senior level meetings in which nothing really happens, but they're important. Somehow the working level relationships don't work culturally unless you have these high level handshake type meetings. And the previous CEO of Munich Re, Nicholas von Bomhard, was a master at this. He spent a lot of time going to visit these clients and having these very high level meetings. And so if he was meeting a large life insurance company, he would very often ask me to come along. He came from the general insurance side of the business, felt he didn't know life maybe as well as he should. So he wanted to have a wingman. And the conversation would start, and it would usually start on a sort of high level. It would be about politics, what's happening with the European Union, all that stuff. And Nicholas was fantastic at just talking of this. You would think he was Angela Merkel's best friend the way he would talk. And then the conversation would come round, and if they would ask some question, as soon as they got to something to do with life insurance, he would immediately recognise when he was in danger of straying out of his depth. And rather than take that step, he would just go, to be honest, I'm not the expert on life insurance, which was why I bought Andy, and he would just sort of look at me. And I just thought that's a supreme confidence that firstly, he wouldn't step into it and have to be rescued, which would be awkward. He wouldn't, or step in it and sort of lead it in the wrong way so that I would sort of have to somehow sort of slightly correct it, or just, go along with it being wrong. And it almost didn't matter what I would say, they would just sort of nod wisely. And that sort of ability to just, admit what you don't know, and either learn or just, find a wingman who can do it better than you. I think is one of the most important skills in any kind of leader, really.
I think that's a nice place for us to talk about the idea of teams and the idea of successful teams, and how we can be humble as leaders and recognize what we're not good at, and bring a team together of people who are much better at those things than we are, and then empower them and give them agency. That's a great place for us maybe to talk a bit about Munich Re Digital Partners, because I think we've already spoken a bit about it. But for those who don't know what Munich Re Digital Partners is, would you please tell us?
It's a partnership and investment vehicle. So it's a business that partners with insurtechs, so with new technology-based insurance businesses, and also invests in them at the same time. We started the business in 2016. We've made about by the end of 2020, we'd made about $500 million. We've invested about $400 million in our partners. So we became the giant of the sort of insurance technology revolution, which is going on just now.
Great. So for those listening, so basically what Munich Re Digital Partners were doing, were giving the backing to interesting insurtechs, exciting insurtechs, giving them the ability to go out and write business through direct investment, and giving them capacity as well to write those.
That's right. That's right. The thing about insurance is, if you imagine trying to start a little tiny insurance business. So you think, I'll focus on one thing. I'll just write homeowners insurance for people in London. That's a nice steady thing. And if I can make that work, I'll do something else. So, okay, so what do I need? Well, I need some distribution, an app, a front end, a website, whatever it is. So I build that, and behind that, I need an underwriting engine to be able to price. So I can build some technology to do that. I get some rates from somewhere, I'm not quite sure where yet. Behind that, I need, if people have, you sell insurance in order that you can pay claims. So I need some claims software and a claims team. Behind that, I need what they call a system of record. The regulator will expect me to have a database in which everyone who's got a policy from me, I've got all their details. I also, of course, need a bunch of regulatory permissions. So I need legal structure. I need to apply for various things. I need to have a compliance team. Where am I going behind that? I've got money coming in and out, so I need billing. I need the admin around that, reconciliation, accounting, technical accounting, all going to go. So I need a balance sheet. I need an insurance company. That's going to need capital for my insurance company. I need maybe $10 million. I need a reinsurance structure on the back of my carrier to make it do something. People won't like me unless I have a rating. So I now need to go and talk to the rating agencies. Now, for about 3 years, 30 million quid, and I still haven't started my experiment, which is just to see whether I could persuade people to buy policies in London. And if they don't, goodness me, what a lot of time and money I've wasted. So we looked at that and we thought, well, if you're a technology guy, then you think the first part of that's easy, the distribution, the website, all that stuff. If you're creative ideas brand guy, you've probably got loads of brilliant ideas, and you think all of this technical accounting balance sheet stuff's hard. But actually, if you're like me, you're an insurance geek who's spent his entire career in this industry, that stuff at the back, the technical accounting balance sheet stuff's easy. I know hundreds of people who can do that stuff. I know all of the systems, and they're all the same. Everybody uses more or less the same system. So we thought, well, why don't we do the back stuff, the stuff at the back, the boring stuff? We find partners who do the stuff at the front that we don't understand, and that we who've been in the business know is actually really hard, and where you really create advantage. If you can find customers a bit more cheaply, or persuade customers to buy your product a bit better than the next person, then you have the ability to be fantastically successful. So it was a kind of plug and play solution. If you want to build a new insurance business, you come and plug into our system, take advantage of our technology, our data transfer, our back-end processing capability, our underwriting capital. Oh, and by the way, because you're partnering with us, we'd also like to invest in you, so we share in your success. That was the basic business model. We've got about 20 partnerships running. It's a really great business because you become a really important partner to these fantastically capable entrepreneurs. People like Stephen Mendel, who've built. Stephen's built, I don't know, 6 or maybe 7 businesses before this, and working with these people is tremendous. They have incredible energy and an incredible emotional resilience to ride the waves of building a new business.
So Steve Middle's the CEO of Bought by Many. For those who don't know, Bought by Many, that's a Munich Re Digital Partners business. Tell us a bit about, because I think that's actually the way we talked about teams earlier on, and they were one of the business I'd like to talk about. But in your job then as the CEO of Digital Partners, you were sort of effectively talent scouting. So businesses would come to you with an idea, with a concept, and say, hey, look, we'd love to have this provision from Munich Re. Could you help us? So you were obviously seeing a lot of different opportunities. So what made people like that Bought by Many and all the others stand out? What were the things that you were looking for?
I mean, the first and most important thing actually is the leader and the team themselves, and this actually is independent of the idea or the industry. For venture capital to work, and that's essentially what we're doing. We're putting relatively small amounts of money, small in Munich Re terms. We might invest 5 million or 10 million, but you're putting it at risk in highly risky businesses. 90% of startups fail. We all know those kind of stats. So the first thing you need is there has to be a big prize. If this succeeds, it has to be big, otherwise it's not worth it, right? I'm not gonna bet on something where I've got a 90% chance of failure if when it works it's only going to make me 2 times my money back. It needs to make me 10 times, 100 times my money back. So with that comes the ability to build a big business. So that's the most important thing. You look at an entrepreneur and the team around them, and you say, can I imagine these guys running a business that's big enough? Not only does the idea have to succeed, but there has to be a team that's capable of actually running a business at that scale.
And so I suppose that makes me then think about what you have seen in the way that those companies do their recruitment as well. So have you noticed anything about the way that they build those teams? Because all of the founders I speak to are saying, like, okay, and we know we got to get our recruitment right. And I mean, I have opinions on this as a headhunter myself, but what have you seen? Have you seen this approach to recruiting people differ between businesses, and what have you seen as being the more successful models?
Oh yes. I suppose the most important thing is engagement. When I joined Munich Re, I had one interview and a short follow-up. Now that was probably unusual, but most CEO processes are relatively short. 2, 3, 4 interviews in a large corporate, and they're also very heavily headhunter driven. They start with the long list. The headhunter comes up with a long list of names, and I know Andy, he's a good guy. I know Julie, she's great. I know Tom, I'm not sure about Tom. And as a client, you go, okay, that's fine. Let's have Andy and Julie on the short list, and we'll not have Tom. And then they bring the short list. They've done the pre-interviews for you. And in a sense, you're sort of one cog in the process. I'm involved in a senior hire at the business that I'm chair of now, Buckle Insurance, which is a US startup insurance company, and this is a key role for us. So the candidates have been whittled down through successive interviews with the 2 founders, 2 other key members of the management team. Now all the members of the board have interviewed the 3 finalists, and we've got to sort of decision point now, and we don't agree, and we're now having a board level discussion about these individual candidates, and talking about, first of all, do we agree on the facts? Do we agree who is stronger in this area and that area? And then what is it that we need, and how important is this person's cultural fit compared to their technical skills? And what you have here is just this extremely engaged process. In my corporate life, I have never seen a recruitment process, even at group CEO level, which is that engaged. That engagement, I think, shows that startups, they take hiring more seriously. A lot of them don't use headhunters, which I think is a reaction to how headhunters operate in corporate life, and I think it's a mistake.
Well, you're gonna be preaching to the choir on this one. I got to know you through Oliver Wyman, and I always said actually, as a headhunter, the best place you can learn your trade is in strategy consulting, because I think for so long strategy consultancies had recognized the importance of hiring people. When you got all your business is about the quality of the people that you have to be incredibly dedicated to making sure you get the right type of people, the right type of intellect. I agree with you, though. I still believe in our own industry in headhunting that maybe the discipline of recruitment, the methodologies which are applied, are still actually not that well defined. And that's, I think, ultimately where a lot of the problems come in. And I think too often recruitment processes focus in and around things like competencies. And they then start neglecting the values and the motivation of the candidate. And I think this comes down to a very, very basic reason, Andy, is that most people never get trained in how to interview. So you go through your professional development as a senior executive, and maybe you get a couple of lessons about how to ask open, closed, and continuation questions, how to the difference between situational behavioral questions, the importance of value-based questions. What are values and how are those value-based questions assessed? What is a case study versus sort of a fit interview? All of the sort of the mechanisms that we have at our disposal during an interview, they're not really that taught. So I think that's probably, and it still doesn't, I still not failed to be surprised by the fact that we have groups of highly intelligent founders going into incubators around the world, and they're still not primarily taught how to build teams.
One of the reasons I think that they tend not to use headhunters is because, if a founder who's come out of corporate and has seen a corporate hiring process knows that they don't want that, and they think, well, that's what headhunters bring. I'd rather have somebody that I know, or somebody that I know who's recommended that person. But I think that stems from a misunderstanding of how the hiring process works. It seems to me what you want in a hiring process is you want somebody who can introduce the market to you. I don't honestly care if it's everybody in the market, but it needs to be a broad enough selection of people. And then what you want from your headhunter in that process is just another voice. You don't want, I think, a gatekeeper. You want someone to run the process in a mechanical way, but I think not run the process in a sort of intellectually, if you see what I mean. Too often, I think corporates, because we don't know really how to recruit, we hide behind our headhunter. The best startups around, the process I'm using in Buckle, we are using a headhunter. And the headhunter is at the table, and he has a right to be at the table because he has also interviewed the candidates, some of them several times. He has a different viewpoint, and he's a strong enough guy that when he sits around the virtual board table with us discussing the candidates, and I say, well, it seems to me Tom's got a bit too much of this going on. He'll say, well, I didn't really see that, actually. I wonder whether you didn't ask that question in the right way or something. And so then what you have is a real partner who understands what it is that you're trying to do, and is trying to find the person that fits. The problem with that is that it just takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of executive time. And the real difficulty in life is you just don't have enough time because your diary has been filled for you by somebody.
Yeah, I think that's a nice observation about time, and it's a very cognitively intense process. So I wonder, with your own process that we were talking about here, in terms of where the disagreement happens, and we'll just use this as an interesting test case, is it around the function, the competencies, or is it around the sort of the values and the motivations of the individuals?
Yeah, I think it's around all of those and how those trade off. I think you're right. It's about the role. One of the things you have in a startup is you're never really clear on your roles, and I think a good recruitment process is one which accepts that there is some role ambiguity. So I know I need somebody with a certain skill set because my problem is sort of over here, and if I imagine the ideal person in that role, then I've got a set of sort of attributes that might work. And then you go and find reality, and you've got a bunch of people who don't quite fit that. I mean, who knows? You may strike lucky, and there may be that precise person there, but that's going to be likely. So what you have instead then is you have this iterative process, in which I think, Mary's a good candidate. If Mary was doing the role, what would the role look like? And how would the business work around Mary? How would we deal with where Mary's weak? So then you have a slightly different role. You now have a Mary-shaped role. And if you don't like the look of that role, then Mary's not your candidate. But I could put Bill in that role. The role will look different with Bill because he's got different skills to Mary, and maybe it will fit better for Bill. And so then that's when I sense you really get value out of a headhunter, because the people around the board table, they know the business very well. Some of us have particular skills in this area, so they understand the sort of the technical aspects of the hire better. But we all understand what we are trying to create from our business. But honestly, we are not trained to understand people in that way. So you sort of have this. Mary would fit. For Mary, you would need this kind of a role. Are we comfortable with that kind of a role? Have we judged Mary right fitting that role? What if the role was more like this? Could Mary stretch that? And that's where you need a headhunter to say, well, actually, I think she could. I think Mary's growing in that dimension. This is what you would need to think about in terms of development. She's not going to get there for 6 months. So can you afford to, can you afford to wait that long, and so on? What I think I've learned at Buckle is that if you are serious about that for an important position, you have to put the time in, and you have to get the expertise. That's like you say, that's where I think you get value from your headhunter, because they have it's not about their network, it's about the professional skills they have that you don't have.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of very interesting points you raised there, and I think about and this kind of links to a very important question I'd like to end up sort of talking to you a bit about around diversity, actually. But I think when we hire someone, we're always looking for performance. We want that candidate to be able to perform. And there's this really important balance between performance capacity and performance potential. And I think for any really talented person, that they want to know that they can do enough of the job so that they don't feel entirely lost, but they want to know that there's enough stretch, there's enough, potential for them to grow into. And so maybe as we're interviewing candidates, we're starting to see that. And I think the balance to have as we go into the recruitment process is to recognize, okay, in your instance with a Mary, does Mary have, say, 80% of the performance capacity that we need to get the job done and to be, for us to be able to move forward as a business? But there's enough performance capacity left in the role and for her that she can grow into that position. And I think that's also where we stop falling into these traps of just hiring dudes, because there's lots and lots of guys, and more recruitments I'm doing, actively want women and want more diversity because they recognize that actually makes the team stronger. We're going back to some of the earlier points. You can see the world in a different way. If you're a woman, if you're from an ethnic minority, if you have a different sexuality, you just see the world in a different way, and that makes the team stronger. I would like to finish up talking about diversity because this is a real issue, not only in insurance, but in fintechs and technology generally. So I wonder what your views are on, how that gap gets closed, if you see it as a problem, and what can be done to improve diversity.
Yes, I think diversity is important, and I think it's something we need to do actively. I was always struck by that book by Caroline Criado Perez, the one about explaining how the world is basically built for men, from its physical infrastructure to the way the world operates. Safety systems are built with men's bodies in mind, and so on. And this is because we default to masculine all of the time. I try to make a conscious effort when I write, when I use examples, I use she rather than he. And I started doing it because it seemed to me a good, if easy, thing to do. And I was struck by my HR director at a previous business coming to me and saying, thank you for using she. And I was surprised that anyone ever really noticed. But for her, this was massively important. And she said, you don't realize how many people will hear you say she and go, wow, he actually thinks this is an important thing. The problem actually is that you forget. As I think about it, I'm conscious that all the way through our discussion, I've been using he when I meant she or he. And if we could just default to she, that already puts you in a different mindset. I saw some, in the context of recruiting, I saw some great research that said when you don't put an actual salary down in an advert, but you put competitive or something, fewer women apply. And it strikes me that if you know that as someone who's recruiting someone, then there are just a series of things that you should just do differently. Write your advert, run your recruitment process with women in mind and with diversity in mind. And what you find are better candidates. Never in my experience has this been about I'm going to hire Mary even though I know Tom's better, but I want diversity. I've never had that situation. I think it's about I want to hire the best candidate, and the best candidate is someone out of the population of male, female, gay, straight, trans, black, white, green, wherever, and therefore what I want is a recruitment process which is broad enough to bring all of these people into my net, and a process which is not itself discriminatory, a process which is going to find me the right person for the role.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience actually around pronouns and just simplistic sort of behavior that we can have as white men, two white guys talking about diversity, is that just recognizing, and we were talking, I think we had a CTO position, and there is a real paucity of diversity in technical and particularly CTO positions, because there are some structural issues with more men entering those degrees than there are women, and that causes an issue with the actual candidate pool later on. But you're right, actually, just first of all, I got picked up on that. It was actually using she or using a gender neutral pronouns. And I think that's actually a really important thing, just little things we can all be doing. But I think even beyond just these sort of very surface things, it's actually just changing the way that we behave. And, I remember hearing from senior women who said to me, Will, you will not be surprised how much we still get talked over, how much we don't get listened to, how much this sort of macho behavior is still prevalent in environments. And if people just change the way they behave, that opens up the potential for a more diverse set of voices to be heard. Having a more diverse workforce means that you have less blind spots. If you have somebody in your team who comes from a poor background and you have someone who comes from a rich background, they will see the world in a different way. They'll be same equally intelligent, and they will help your business be more resilient because they will see problems, they will see opportunities. It's the same if you have a woman, same if you have someone who comes from who's maybe Asian or black, gay or straight. They just understand different perspectives of reality, and that helps your team to be that much stronger. So, yeah, that's what we can do, I suppose, ultimately in my job, and I suppose in yours as well. So, Andy, I've been fascinated to hear about your journey and all the things that you've done. But maybe just tell what's happening next, Andy, because I know you've got some news. What's happening for you as we finish up? So, yeah, what's coming next to you?
So I stepped out of Digital Partners from the 1st of December, which was part of my life plan. Everything sort of came together at the right time in that I'd been running the business for 4.5 years. It felt like it was time for change. When you build a business like Digital Partners, we were part of Munich Re, but we were also on the side, and the business began to look very like me. And you as a CEO, you have to be aware of the strength of your own voice. And I thought the business could do with someone else leading it. I also passed the big 5-0 in September.
Congratulations! Wow.
Very much. And when I started work in my early 20s, I felt I would really like to go and do a PhD, but firstly, I didn't have any money, and secondly, I didn't really have a subject at that point. But at 20, looking forward to 60 just seemed impossibly far away. So I said, I'll work really hard until I'm 50, and then go and do a PhD, and have a different style of life. So I'm right at the beginning of that journey now. I'm sort of hoping to start a PhD sometime next year. I'm doing then also some non-exec and some advisory work. So is
this a form of retirement, Andy? Is this what we're saying? This is retirement at 50?
It's sort of, I think these days for people like us, I think retirement is not really a concept that makes sense anymore. I get retirement. If you spent 40 years doing a physically demanding job, then I think you have a right to stop doing that and to do what you like. My life has not been so physically demanding that I'd like to do something different. And for me, there's a big difference between being a CEO and being a non-exec director. And the difference is being a CEO is all consuming. It has to be your number one focus in everything. It takes precedence over other interests you might have. It very often takes precedence over family life. It takes over your weekends, and that is just inevitable. Even if you're not doing something, you're thinking about it. There's always stuff going on. Whereas being a non-exec director allows you, I think, to advise, to engage, to use your skills, to give something back to the industry that that sustained me, and just to have a slightly different pace of life.
And you've made this quite an exciting and brave choice at 50 to step away from this role that so many people would want. But how have you managed your well-being? And you can say terribly, but do you have any tools or what have you done to sort of try and help create some balance in your life?
Yeah. Honestly, the answer I think would be terribly. I'm skeptical of CEOs who claim they have balance. Most of the things I see from CEOs who are who claim to have mindful techniques, it tends to involve getting up at 3 a.m. and doing meditation and then going out for a run and so on. And this is all very fine as long as you have absolutely no family life and only sleep 3 hours a night. I think the reality is, as a CEO of almost any size business, but certainly a reasonable size business, you just are, you're not only busy, but you also have, an accumulation of stress. There is always stuff going on in your business. There is always bad news to deal with, because when things are going well, you don't need to know. When you spend your day dealing with the problems.
So how do you unwind then? What's your sort of your relaxation technique?
You retire at 50. To be honest, I never had a great relaxation technique. I suppose you have to try and take your mind off things. What you don't want to do is dwell on things. But I walk the dog. My wife used to say she would see me out of the window, and I would set off with the dog, and I would be, talking to myself, or rather talking to the dog, and I would chant her all the way through the walk. And if I was still visibly chuntering on the way back, she would know I'd had a bad week.
So that's an interesting type of.
The dog absorbs a lot of stress.
Well, hey, it's honestly not something that's to be sniffed at there. I think there's a coping mechanism there that being outside and walking and being in nature is a very important component of well-being. Certainly why I live in Devon. So as we're finishing up, one of the questions I love asking people is I'm an avid reader, and I'd just love to know about the books that have interested you, Andy, and your background. So are there sort of 3 books that have really sort of impacted you, or a book, or any book that you give away?
I am not a business book reader. I will be. I'll be honest with you. One business book that I think is worth reading if you're at all in the innovation space or interested in innovation, which is by Charlie Fine, who's a professor at MIT. It is called Clockspeed, and that really is about the speed at which different industries change and how they go through this kind of cycle of innovation, consolidation, disaggregation. That's worth reading to get a sense of in the industry that you're in, what can you really expect from innovation? When is the right time? Reading that book was one of the things that persuaded me that this time the insurtech was real. I could see that the industry was ready for it. Beyond that, I suppose this is back to mindfulness. I read every day. Mostly novels, non-fiction, all sorts of things. If you read every day, you can take on things that are bigger. I've just finished James Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson, and it's absolutely fascinating. Sort of insight into an 18th century genius.
Is it mostly biographies that you read then? Sort of.
No, I read all sorts of novels. My favorite author is Haruki Murakami. He's Japanese. He writes novels about people trapped in strange situations.
So your favorite book then? What is the favorite book of all time, Andy, for you? If you had to choose one,
it would be Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami, which is about a teenage boy growing up, going to college. So you meet him just as he's gone to college, and he's a bit lost. His best friend had committed suicide, and he doesn't really understand why, and he sort of vaguely thinks it might be his fault. And it's just a beautiful book. I'm not ashamed to admit I read it for the first time on a long flight over to South Korea, and I cried all the way through the flight, which is slightly embarrassing, but it is a wonderful.
that is a beautiful recommendation and a cool moment, and I think probably an apt place to leave it for the conversation. And I must say, Andy, I've greatly appreciated your time and your learning, and I think what Munich Re Digital Partners have done has been fantastic. So I think you're really proud of that development. There's been some great businesses come out of that. I want to wish you a really fantastic non-retirement. Thank you so much for your insights and sharing the time with us today.
Thank you very much, Will. That was a lot of fun.
Well, all right. Thanks so much for joining us during that conversation. It's been a really interesting one, and I hope you'll take some time to join us on the next episode, which will be coming up soon. I want to give a big shout out to our producer, Andrea Merskin, who's done a fantastic job. And I hope you'll listen in for the next episodes and continue to give us a bit of feedback on how we're doing. But until then, be well and have a fantastic week.